title of one of her paintings reads, "Small openings give way to large spaces." In a way, this is a pointer to Rekha Rodwittiya's artistic career, who is privileging us with a slideshow and presentation of her artwork today. Graduation from the M.S University Baroda opened up to the prestigious Inlaks Scholarship for a Master's in Painting from the Royal College of Art, London in 1984. Then invitations as guest artist and visiting teacher began pouring in from Stockholm, Torino, the Rockefeller Foundation, Asian Cultural Council in the US, etc. As her artistic practice grew, so did the number of group and solo exhibitions where her work received much acclaim in India at Mumbai, New Delhi, Bangalore, Chennai and Kolkata, and internationally in UK, New York, Geneva, Venice, Brazil, Oslo and Havana. Rekha Rodwittiya's work delineates complex issues of life and living, alienation and belonging, discrimination and acceptance, accord and discord. Her paintings reflect her struggle for her own rightful existence amid reflections and pressures from the past, and her sensitivity to the prevailing socio-political reality. Thus, her empathic portrayals of women concretize the otherwise intangible psychological realm, drawing upon a heritage of elemental imagery and viewed through the prism of personal experience and day-to-day realities. Rekha Rodwittiya confesses that she experiences all the terror and agony of stepping into an unknown. But as the popular "Dar ke aage" ad goes, it is finally rewarded with a taste of success. When finding herself at odds with the male chauvinism of her contemporaries in the Indian Radical Painters and Sculptors Association, which did not allow for any gendered redefinition of art practice, Rekha resolved to chart a path of her own and articulate through her paintings her feminist political intentions. Seeking to represent the female figure without allowing for the typical voyeuristic patriarchal gaze, she earlier depicted tortured or broken female forms strewn about in stifling, hostile interior spaces, and then moved on to create compositions that aggressively pitched figures out of the picture plane. Recent times have seen her exploring the archetypal female figuration in a vibrant celebratory mode, often as a monumental figure amid objects of metaphorical intent, thus articulating a strong comment on the contemporary environment. Rekha Rodwittiya is also the founder and CEO of the Collective Studio at Baroda, which has been established in the traditions of the Guru-Shishya practice, with teachings, residencies, curatorial projects and fundraising as some of its activities. She has been on various educational boards and is involved in the planning of policies on art education and funding for the arts. She lectures on contemporary Indian art both in India and abroad. As one who does not shrink from the feminist tag, she also writes both on her blog and in art journals on gender politics, issues of identity, curatorial methods, and other subjects of concern within the context of art practice. Before I invite the artist on stage, I would request the chairman, Mr. Dewan Manna, to also give an introduction to the artist.
Thank you, Dr. Judge. I think after such a wonderful introduction, I have no other introduction except to say that I welcome Rekha Rodwittiya. This is a very special day. Many people come and days go. It happens to be the last day of the financial year, but not the last day of, such wonderful people coming to this academy and the city. And as you have guessed by now, and many of you must have read about her, that she is a person who has lived on her own terms, literally, and who is openly, she says that she is privileged. Privileged not only because of coming from a very sound economic background, but because of the privilege of having the ability to to decipher, to understand, to say what she wants to say. The intellectual, privileged person, Rekha ji, I welcome you. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a delight to be here at all of you, and my grateful thanks to Divanji for this invitation, and thank you so much, Dr. Judge, for the kind words with which you've introduced me. An introduction normally offers a basic understanding regarding something that requires to be comprehended in greater detail. Today, this is the general attempt I make in bringing my art as a subject of debate. It would be wise, however, to caution that within the areas of perception, there are always variables of approach by which to negotiate meaning. Art is born from spaces of considered deliberation and requires therefore to be contextualized if the contextual premises are to be accurately deciphered. I find it necessary for me to begin this discourse by stating that the privilege of birth and the gift of education impacted itself upon me from a very young age. As a much-desired girl child, I believe that I have carried the legacies of a female history with a conscious alertness. It led me very early in my personal journey to a space of belonging where the bedrock of my feminist beliefs could take root. Though we all consider ourselves to be individuals, we nonetheless belong within larger legacies of existence. This double space we inhabit of the personal and the collective becomes intriguing to examine in relation to what conjoins and what separates one person's world of involvement from the other, and where both can hold relevance without devaluing the other. When accepting this invitation to deliver a lecture on my work at the Lalit Kala Academy in Chandigarh, I decided that I would share certain facets of my life and narrate to you the significance of important episodes that shaped my ideas and informed my art practice over the years. The works, therefore, are not within a strict chronology of time, but instead are arranged to offer you an overview of my development as an artist. I see such opportunities of interaction as providing opportunities to open up larger discourses in which the process of engagement holds an openness and vulnerability, which consequentially invites a more intimate space of viewing. What becomes of relevance, therefore, is to engage with the intentions and ideas shared. In doing so, we can hope to expose ourselves to other realities. In evaluating my development as an artist, I have always upheld that in particular, what has been seminal to the shaping of my visual articulation has been the process of learning undertaken at the time I was an art student. I studied painting under the principal guidance of Jyoti Bhatt and Nasreen Mohammadi, and it is from them most particularly that I imbibed an understanding of ethics and values pertaining to art and life, and comprehended the importance of constructing a political space of personal governance. It is those initial stages of insistence to comply with a disciplined and comprehensive methodology of approach towards learning the rudimentary basics in art that provided me with a rock-solid plinth from which to craft my pictorial language and take it through different ideational explorations over the years. However irksome these conventional procedures may sometimes appear, they aid in creating a foundation of skills that provides a fluency in areas of observation and translation. As a student in Baroda, I was exposed to a powerful combination of imbibing both the aspects of the traditional as well as deciphering the challenges of an evolving modernity, which then set the stage for me to engage in examining how to locate my personal history within the larger framework of a cultural context. There was a strong figurative language that prevailed in Baroda in the 70s and 80s, and it is within this milieu that I absorbed influences. Emotive issues related to cultural identity in a post-colonial history were being examined. I chose the territory of personal histories and so employed a simple naturalism in my early works to talk about a private world that my outer countenance camouflaged. The practice of reading as a daily habit was how we expand upon classroom information. In 1981, I completed my BA in painting from Baroda, which was a 5-year program. I joined the MA course for only a year and worked at the college in the private studio of Jyoti Bhatt, which he was not using and which was situated in those days near the library. That year was like a sabbatical, and it provided me the space to grapple with my pictorial language with no interference of academic agendas. I produced a series of intimate-sized imaginary portraits in watercolor that was a complete departure from my early narrative works in oil of the time. This proved to be a hugely significant shift in relation to my pictorial language and created a work routine of independence that centered on accountability towards production and learning as a self-discipline. Though the Faculty of Fine Arts did not hold the specific space of feminist discourse in those days, what it did offer was an educational climate that was diverse, and where cultural information from both local and global influences were prevalent and encouraged. This therefore allowed me as a student to engage with gender inquiries and formulate my personal politics as a visual artist. In 1982, I went to London on an Inlaks Scholarship, choosing out of a number of admissions available to me in America and the United Kingdom, to enroll at the Royal College of Art that is situated in South Kensington in London. This decision arose from my desire to study under the tutelage of Professor Peter de Francia, whose knowledge of India, its political cultural history, and his awareness of contemporary art of the Asian region provided me the ability to contextualize my own learning without the renunciation of my cultural roots. It was in London where I began to re-examine more exactingly my figuration and the narrative techniques that I was employing. I drew and painted exhaustively for 2 years, creating a prolific body of 200 works. A kaleidoscopic and splintered structuring of space, coupled with an almost cartoon-like language that was violent in what it depicted, became the spectacle of the large, life-sized watercolors that I painted in my concluding moments at the RCA. Professor Peter de Francia was my personal tutor throughout my MA program. His methods of teaching were brutally insistent of an honesty that embraced the entirety of one's world, leaving little or no scope for excuses or whimsical attitudes. He abhorred indifference and was deeply passionate about holding self-accountability and aesthetic standard to scrutiny. What I learned was the valuable lesson that excellence comes only from the rigors of hard work, and that knowing what compounds one's personal politics allows us to make art with meaning. One's peers are often the most valuable source for critical discourse. The painting department of the Royal College of Art had an eclectic mix of students who were robust in their views and vocal in their curiosities that framed their pictorial investigations. In those days, the painting department was housed in a wing of the Victoria and Albert Museum. This proximity was a heady euphoria for me that led to many hours spent in the museum involved with the process of renegotiating ideas on perception and deciphering from what was learnt through art history. This exercise of deconstructing works in order to understand its true merit from more objective principles of evaluation was perhaps the inception of my maturity as a young artist. The time spent as a student in London was of deep significance to the development of not only my pictorial language, but equally was the watershed for my personal growth as an individual. When I was a student at the Fine Arts faculty in Baroda from 1976 to 1981, India, with its oppressive patriarchy, had little space for feminist discourse. And I often felt smothered by the overriding socialist and Marxist preoccupations of my colleagues, which completely excluded the ideas of viewing gender issues as a separate area of consideration when addressing ideas pertaining to equal rights and liberty. In contrast, Britain in the 80s was fecund with literature, cinema, theatre, music, performance, theoretical studies, and protest that focused very prominently on the voice of feminist intent. Being able to engage with women's studies as a territory offered me material of experiences through which I could establish the parameters of my content. Social, cultural, and political histories and my own personal self-representation came together in an analytical convergence, providing me the territory of my subject and the discovery of a collective feminist space that beckoned my imprint. I was finally able to devise my visual articulation within a space that recognized its ancestry. I was 24 years old and imbibing lessons as an art student from the discourses related to a post-colonial history emanating from the Asian subcontinent. These discourses pertained to issues of identity and attempted to examine new pictorial idioms that addressed the conflict of India's ruptured cultural history and which re-examined the space of the vernacular and the indigenous as areas of importance. All this became the panorama of consequence for me, yet always and at all times maintaining my perceptions and formulating my inquiries through a gender-conscious prism. I understood that as an artist, the most liberating lesson learned is that one's own sense of belonging is held in multiple histories that form the stories of the world. And it is the curiosity of wanting to know about the unfamiliar that invites us through the doorways of many new discoveries. I learned, however, that like any sensible traveler, each of us needs to carry along in their journey as artists the memories of our own origins in order to collate with greater coherence and thereby not lose ourselves at the altars of the great international global mergers that attempt to homogenize everything for the ease of consumption. I understood the power of the visual artist and equally understood the manipulations of art history and the power lobbies at play in these recordings of documentation. I returned to India in 1984 despite the professional options available for me to remain as a practicing artist in Britain, as my personal politics found its alignment in living and working in India. On my return home, the figures within my work began to command and occupy more centrality. These works were large in scale and often busily populated with imagery that was expressionistic and where the surface bore the quality of agitated gestural markings. These paintings were like theatrical stages of enactments, bold and confronting, and demanding the attention of the viewer. I chose to continue to live in Baroda on my return as it contained a community of artists whose preoccupations with figuration also reflected common linguistic concerns that I was interested in. Besides this, Baroda was where my own personal history had its roots. This city became my home in 1967 when I was just 9 years old and my father was posted to the Air Force Base as its commanding officer. Around the same time of my return to India from England in 1984, a group of young artists from Kerala were also pitching their tent in this city. I refer in particular to K.P. Krishnakumaran, Ashokan Podaval, Alex Matthew, N.N. Rimzan, and Surendran Nair. This energetic and intellectually sharp group of young artist activists were coming from a context of a cultural history that they were structuring, which was still to be art historically documented, yet which was a palpable intervention with resulting consequences such as their strike in 1979 at the Trivandrum Art College that introduced educational reform as a result. Though I was not completely convinced with some of their political views that they touted as strategies required to revitalize contemporary Indian art, and which some of them made as a cultural manifesto to support their movement at a later date, these 6 young artists nonetheless infused the environment with new energies related to figuration, as well as readdressing the old canons that formulated the interpretations of post-independence art as practiced then in India. K.P. Krishnakumaran went on to become a founder member of the Indian Radical Painters and Sculptors Association in 1987. These artists became friends and colleagues with whom I shared a feisty intellectual relationship that encompassed the passions of the prevailing issues of that time, and where the battlegrounds of discourse was the catalyst to the production of our art. The assimilation of a personal pictorial language is almost always a hard-won process. Many influences are gathered and many areas of teachings resisted. And between this tightrope act of balancing how much to absorb and what to reject, an informed and critical aesthetical space is finally arrived at. These years for me were vital as they were invigorating and charged with an energy that was fueled by the desire to hold a self-designated responsibility as an artist. My personal choices as a woman at all times have always been outside the predictable norms of prescriptive sanction. And so the attitudes of traditional mindsets that prefer conformity continuously make a challenging backdrop within which I set the stage of my own existence. I believe I've had the opportunities to re-examine and reformulate more purposefully than if this had not been the case. The areas of the marginal are always more fraught with tensions, yet it is this precise energy of conflict that provides the greater possibilities of clarity to finally be realized. In the personal narrative of my biography, on the 10th of June 1977, whilst still a student and with the complete approval of my family, I married my friend who was a foreign student from Thailand. After my marriage, I was diagnosed with hormone imbalances, which acutely impaired my reproductive system. I was therefore medically advised to immediately attempt to conceive, and so my son Mithun was born on the 2nd of November 1978 when I was 20 years old. My marriage, however, broke down before the birth of my child, and so I filed for a divorce that was granted in 1983. I met the challenges of being a single parent undeterred, and as Mithun was a much desired and planned addition to my life, there was therefore never any quandary regarding this lifelong commitment of the responsibility to parent and nurture. Being a parent at a young age offered me invaluable experiences that propelled my energies with more focus than if I had been absent of such responsibilities. I therefore always acknowledge the debt I owe to my son for the gift of this maturity he unknowingly bestowed on me, and for the delight of rediscovering innocence through his eyes. I have always had strong views about monetary independence for women, and so from the age of 18 onwards, I have been financially independent. I sold my artworks at nominal prices through alternative practices such as pavement exhibitions, collectively organized by us as students, and through architect friends in Baroda who were purchasing for interior projects they were doing for clients. I did photography assignments professionally, as well as exhibited and sold my photographs after learning it as a subsidiary subject in my undergraduate program under the tutelage of Jyoti Bhatt. As a student, I also worked part-time at the Urja Art Gallery in Baroda, which was initially housed in the planetarium at Kamati Bagh, and worked with traveling textile and craft exhibitions that came to display their work at the Faculty of Fine Arts in Baroda. I was keenly aware of the need to structure my life in a practical and decisive way that could focus on raising my son, honing my aptitude as a painter, and consciously implementing my feminist beliefs within my lived experiences. It is important to note that my insistence on economic independence at such a young age was not a result of any family discord, but was in fact a tribute to the upbringing that had nurtured these ideals of women's empowerment since I was born. I grew up in a post-independence urban nuclear middle-class family, embraced by liberal attitudes and intellectual freedom that supported informed opinions, and where we as young children were expected to experience life without having to conform unduly to conservative protocol. My parents were therefore at all times accepting and encouraging of all the directions I chose for myself, trusting me to utilize the gift of their belief to know myself without apology. In 1985, my friendship with Surendran Nair widened to include our commitment to conjoin our personal lives to become a family. This partnership of 29 going on 30 years is an uncompromised relationship that keeps at its core our engagement with one another as artists at all times. I commenced my professional career immediately on the completion of my university education in 1984. Whilst still at the Royal College of Art in London, I was approached by Mr. Ibrahim Al-Qazi, who offered me a solo show at his gallery in Delhi. At the same meeting, unsolicited, he also proposed a contract for 3 years so that I could focus on my studio practice on my return to India. This act of faith, unasked for, gifted me a space of concentrated time to consolidate my focus and work without financial anxieties as a young professional. The relationship that established premier art galleries in India have with their artists whom they represent is quite unique and special, involving sustained and consistent interaction and support of their work at all times. In recent years, those galleries that jumped into the big money bonanza through art and attempted to Bollywoodize the art with the extravaganzas of excessive hype and rainbow dreams have finally closed shop and disappeared overnight into oblivion because their intentions were only those of a trading mentality. Longevity within art management requires a staying power that can weather the ups and downs of market trends, recessions, and auction house experiments that may go awry. It has been a conscious and considered choice right from the inception of my career to work only through a gallery system, and with one gallery at any given time as my principal gallery. I desire to uphold an association of professional fidelity, and my relationships with galleries since 1987 onwards has never been contracted. Yet I emphatically insist that all transactions of my art, whether commissioned, project-based, or inquiries from private buyers, must be routed through the gallery system. By maintaining this module of representation, where my art is disseminated through a gallery system, I believed that informed professionals create appropriate contexts within which it is presented to an audience, and I am left free to work unhindered and independent of the constraints of art management. My association with Geeta Mehra of Sakshi Gallery dates back to 1990, and till date remains a relationship of mutual benefit because the rules of engagement with galleries of repute preserve as sacred, unquestioned autonomy, the unquestioned autonomy of the artist. I have often described the territory of my concerns as a visual artist to be akin to a small garden patch, much loved and faithfully nurtured. This is because I hold as consistent the desire to examine the feminine space of survival, the spirit of female endurance, and the empowerment of pride and self-dignity that centuries of feminist oral histories are infused by, and within which I too wish to find my own resting space in its long shadows. I observe the rituals of confronting daily life that require for us to measure our valor and vulnerability with wisdom. Each of us, in our moments of reflection, will know the value of this double-edged sword. As somebody who has faced the attacks of censorship for representations of nakedness in my art, I continue to insist that cultural vigilantism cannot dictate and will not compromise the liberty that is constitutionally my right. Mature art holds radical positions that are not about sensationalizing for mere effect alone. Art is a space that strategizes arguments, problematizes as a method of introspection, is confrontational, is often used as a subversive tool, and is not a space that is designed to entertain the consent of another to validate its existence. This is what independent authorship and artistic autonomy must mean within a democratic space of a secular nation. The world that we place ourselves central to becomes a tapestry patterned by incidents and histories that demand our participation willingly or otherwise. As artists, we often become the chroniclers of larger narratives that hold both the particularity of our lives as well as a wider world of information. Pictorial language is often about the engagement with re-examining traditions and modernity within the contexts of changing requirements. Artists take it upon themselves to mediate with existing realities, and they record the ethos of change via such negotiations to articulate viewpoints of affiliation or resistance. These cultural sequences compile new legacies to be conjoined within the compendium of other histories. The feminist history is one of them. The balance of harnessing skills, imbibing an understanding of aesthetics, and nurturing content are some of the basic requirements if a concept is to be shaped to become a work of art. For me, line and color are predominant elements. The content or subject in my art is pronounced through a visual lexicon that employs the use of metaphors and allegory, and which are continuously informed and aided by those concerns that underlie and provoke the idea in the first place. Important for me, too, is the architectural and physical space where I exhibit my art. This is always to be considered as important when conceiving an idea. In my case, the preliminary preparation for a work of art is processed directly in my head, and I sort through numerous permutations of a single idea before settling on one that I decide best holds the expansiveness of my intention. The process of elaboration on this idea continues once I define what it is I'm seeking to evoke, what the territory of the idea is, and how direct or subverted I may choose the meaning to be. The imaginative process contains both the fear and the excitement of new discoveries, and in the desire to push myself both physically and mentally, I hold my energies alert. In the methodology of articulating a work, it is always the idea that first gets phrased, after which it is the element of color that is decided. Strident and insistent, the color palette that feeds my work is informed by cultural traditions and factors of influence that correlate to the ideas I wish to translate visually. The female figure, often in isolation, represents the presence of a life form that bears witness to the passage of time. I see the female figure as being emblematic to represent energies of being a life-giving force through the centuries, and so I place the female figure with a centrality of focus. The unflinching gaze and the frontal posture of the female protagonist demands that the viewer is obliged to participate and engage with its presence. Stark and arresting in demeanor, these figures, with their unrelenting gaze, stand like protective guardians of the universe. The premise of my work celebrates the ideals of womanhood and explores the multiple avatars that a positioned stance of female empowerment embraces. Though gender equality is far from the norm as a reality of this nation, there is nonetheless a multitude of voices that stridently call to attention the need to dispel the bigoted stereotype of gender bias and seek to accommodate the changes that we know to be possible and real. In a world where atrocities are committed against women in the name of upholding traditional values, a focus to readdress this is vital if we are to define true liberty for all humanity. It is to such collective concerns that I reaffirm my allegiance and remain proud to call myself a feminist. I have chosen to always locate my studio within my home, and it is the central hub from which all things get managed. I multitask at all times as it allows me to handle both my professional and personal worlds simultaneously without letting one or the other to become compromised. I work long hours in my studio with a disciplined regularity where all hours each day are studio hours, 7 days a week when I am not traveling. And life intervenes into this rhythm with practiced deliberation. I attempt to live an ordered and disciplined life, as this allows me to maximize the hours I can be in my studio, because that is where I most want to be. I, however, believe adaptability to circumstance is critical for anyone's survival, and it is in recognizing this that I have taught myself to become a more imaginative person. My studio is an extremely precious space of dwelling for me. It is much more than a mere place within which my artwork is executed. And it mirrors who I am in all the details that reflect the intimacy I have with this space. My studio has personal articles of cherished memories accumulated over the years, and cupboards full of art books that are like special friends who know when I need them most. My library is my lifeline in many ways. It is my private space of mediation into a world of conversations and ideas. And so before I start anything new, it is a common practice that I spend time looking at visuals from these books. My cat is also a great joy in my life, and so I often spend time each day before I begin my work playing with her. These interventions help me to distance myself from the intensity of involvement with my work, to provide a distance to reflect. It helps to provoke my sensibilities to become more critical in its response, and becomes a process by which I purge my mind of any stiltedness. This method of clearing my mind forces me to rediscover the tensions of energies required by which to invest the work with relevance. Though my studio is where my family and close friends often gather, as I work wrapped up in my paint-stained apron, directing and orchestrating a collective coexistence, I am, however, fiercely private and refuse all feelers to entertain cultural agents in this personal sanctum. For an artist, I believe the true acid test towards one's commitment is measured by the ability to sustain one's passions unobserved in one's own personal workspace, and to hold yardsticks of self-accountability that employs no shortcuts. For me, art is a space where everything I know gets clarified, and where doubts are battled, and where failure does not defeat me. When I make an artwork, I feel I know myself best. I find myself observing things minutely at all times. I think this stems from the fact that I do not sketch, so instead I draw inside my head. I carry these tracings of memory, and they accumulate to become my database of references from which I comprehend structure when I reassimilate them into a visual vocabulary of transposed meanings. The narratives in my works are never direct stories, but are territories that hold parables through which meanings are inferred. The forms that an artist creates finally becomes a personalized visual lexicon, invested with specific symbolic meanings, which over time reinforces the preoccupations and arguments that constitute the concerns that prompt the work. As an art student, I grew up imbibing lessons from the traditions of folk and tribal art. It is this exposure that perhaps provided me with my infinite love of decorative embellishment, and where I came to encounter some of the strongest feminist sensibilities, or feminine sensibilities in art, in those quiet rituals of everyday occurrences, like the floor decorations that bejewel the thresholds of simple dwellings. The Indian traditions of embellishment are very beautiful. They cater to a vast spectrum of taste, from the highly refined to the popular roadside kitsch. The sense of inventiveness prevails exquisitely. It is from these rich traditions of ornamentation and adornment that my connection with the decoration as an element within my art was first processed. I love the bling and glitz of it all that holds both the magnificence of celebration and the decay of opulent decadence. I also view the space of popular kitsch as being a vastly democratized zone of coexistence. Site-specific and project-related work, travel, and residencies infuse my art practice with a space of confrontation that challenge my own vulnerabilities in different ways, and which force new devices of approach and resolution to be considered. These spaces become alternative playgrounds of notional strategies where displacement is intended. These locations are somewhat like ephemeral love affairs that are not intended to be conclusive, yet pitch your senses to become highly aroused. India, with its converging histories from over the century that includes diverse and varied influences, makes for a huge tapestry into which contemporary life is embraced. There are many worlds and many differences. that get accommodated and straddled within this multicultural society, and the ease with which contradictory lives and forms coexist in India creates an understanding of the phenomenon of plural practices. However, today, in the rabid climate of divisive religious ideologies and caste politics that insidiously continues to percolate the political system of the nation, we need more than ever to accommodate ideas of plurality and eclecticism as being essential to democracy. As an artist, I cannot ever imagine being blinkered or being devoid of curiosity, and the challenge of travel therefore creates that objective distance to renegotiate with oneself critically. My art often employs myth and legends as territories of reference from which the notion of life, viewed as a journey of assimilation, is explored. The photographic image reappears after I put down my camera 28 years ago. A series of personal occurrences brought back the connection I had to take photographs once again. The bodies of my female protagonists now become the site of retrieval of personal histories. Retraced like mapped terrains, the contours of these figures are extracted from previous paintings, archived like from an archaeological survey. The montage of images laced together quite literally to become the second skin. The painted faces of these figures become the masks to an otherwise intensely personal space of deliverance. Tall and erect, these guardian figures evoke the space of reflection and memories. Whenever I travel away from the familiar, I am always observant of the peculiarities of difference. I call to attention these details because I fear that in the effort to homogenize and create globalized uniformities of communication, we often lose out in recognizing how much there is to learn from examining these areas of the unfamiliar. Differences are necessary as it reinforces the ethnographic, anthropological truth of cultural diversity and thereby cultural specificity. All free societies encourage expressions of contemporary cultural practices that are experimental. These experimental areas of art feed off varied influences to challenge established norms and produce new trends using alternative methodologies, mediums, and materials that add new dimensions to our understanding of creative ideation. Art is about transmutations. I am an artist because it is the best tool that facilitates my desire to interpolate with an outside world. Primeval and tested, it allows me to translate and transpose both fact and imaginative devices of communication and traces the outer world to the inner consciousness and vice versa, thereby making an elaborate tapestry of my own personal belonging. The configuration of an imaginative play with form is often arrived at from what we desire to evoke through them. Art is a space where the recognizable alters itself to become the receptacle of new meanings, and where human experience then becomes the bridge of empathy that allows the viewer to find their connectivity. Nuanced into the characters of each articulated figure are the histories of both my cultural self and the autobiographical that lends voice to the process of my empowerment and emancipation. Conceiving an idea that gets elaborated via visual articulation does not formulate itself without the symbiosis of both the heart and the mind being in tandem. What gets suggested and evoked in the works are the conflicts, polarities, reaffirmations, and a host of other nuances of the challenge of living that blueprints my own existence within a larger universe of collective histories. When invited by my gallery for a solo project presentation at the Indian Art Fair in 2013, I chose to make a work that was long gestating as a conceptual idea. The 4 hand-painted trellised screens, along with the old wooden Kashmiri screen with stainless steel cutout imagery imposed as a facade, holds the ideas of an inside-outside world of multiple existences. where the tension between the seen and the shadowed hold the ambiguities of conflict and resistance. What you then encounter when viewing these works is the tenacity of desire to preserve the ideals of hope and optimism that the labor of female perseverance upholds. I live and breathe in the pride of being a woman, in the knowledge that I am richer in spirit from the stories that recount the courage of women who are survivors of acid attacks or cope with genitalia mutilation or overcome the horrors of sexual abuse. These narratives of self-determination to overcome all odds reminds me of how hard-won the space of female empowerment has been. Art often reflects these life experiences of conflict that deliver to us our conscience, to hold with accountability the purpose we infuse into our lives. From my life, what I desire is the deliverance of my own honesty to myself, where my art and my life are seamed together and hold the image of my representation uncompromised and unfettered by conservative orthodoxies of repression. My art exists finally severed from the umbilical cord that initially defines its articulation, to be then placed in a space of interpretation and discourse, unmonitored by my protection. It must hold the credibility that molded it, if it is not to be felled into wasteful oblivion. Over none of this can I exert control, but what I can do is remain accountable to myself always. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rekha Rodwittiya. What a range of imagery and diversity of imagery, and in the years and years and years of practice, and the amount of production of artworks, and you see, images being redefined, symbols being redefined. Be it the sword is very, very prominent kind of a symbol in your work, and then you see, various other things, scissor, for instance, or a tigress, or an elephant, or a cat, or even the woman herself, and in all the works, all these symbols, which are of course a tool of any artist's imagery or the way you work out your ideas, but they don't really become repetitive. They find new meanings in new works, and the way colors are applied, the range of colors, but the way they are applied in each work differently. And it is really amazing, and one of the facts which you mentioned, that you produced 200 works in 2 years maybe, or maybe less than that, and probably many of us in this city haven't produced 200 works in our lifetimes. And it's for us, and also for the young students over here, a lesson to learn that how an artist can be literally engaged with oneself, with the society. Because as she is, she's not only engaged with her own self, she's engaged with the entire nation, the people of this nation, and the diverse cultural, things which we have in this country. She's engaged with each one of them in a different manner, and she reflects upon it intellectually. One question, because I'll begin with my question today, rather than asking somebody else. See, we artists normally use usual symbols to articulate our thoughts in a visual. But how to express something which is there in the mind, which without any symbol? Because I think you must be doing it, which is probably to me not really so visible. Because because there's so many works to see. In fact, you need maybe 10 years to really to be able to reach somewhere, somewhere closer to your thoughts. So I admit that I haven't been able to, because knowing you this way, you must be having something somewhere where you must be trying to do something which doesn't require any of those symbols.
I don't know how well I can answer this, but let me attempt to. I think from what I've understood, I actually am somebody who believes that nothing comes without influence. I think from the day you're born, you're conditioned, you're influenced, and therefore it's interesting to see how we could be different if we had been surrounded by things other than what would have been our familiar spaces of life. So having said that, it already produces a territory in which I believe all ideation comes from the observed. And sometimes you create your symbology from spaces that don't necessarily hold designated referential material. But it could be very much from what you create as emblematic from something that's mundane, something that may be an article used in a particular way, and you choose to take that, and then the way you put it, the way you place it, how you phrase or frame it, allows it to then take on its transposed meaning. Because I think that what fascinates me as somebody who's structuring visual language, which all of us are doing, or we attempt to, is that very thing where the literal is left behind, and what comes instead is something that holds wider meaning. In other words, becomes a conveyor of larger implications. So you take its intentions and then you embroider them. I think nothing exists without some connections to some space of belonging. So that's as best as I think I've understood, and I hope I've answered it to some extent.
Thank you.
I would be so appreciative of young people, asking something. I would. Don't be intimidated by the sari and the kajal under the eyes. Trust me, you can forget all that. I can turn the other way and you can talk to my back.
And if there is anybody who wants to ask a question in Punjabi or Hindi,
any language, I'll translate that for her. I would really, don't try to phrase anything to make it sound important. Just ask something that may be a curiosity, but do stretch your mind.
As you had mentioned, you use a lot of symbols, and there's a lot of repetition of the objects in what we use in daily life. So, I mean, I also see that your figures are iconic to an extent. I mean, the figure which is there in the banner behind you, the lying woman, resembles to the sleeping Buddha, and probably the figure that, I mean, the figure of standing woman that we see again and again resembles to Tirthankara image at Shravan Beligula. So, I mean, does Indian sculptural tradition influences you a lot? I mean, you have mentioned about folk and tribal art having, I mean, inspired you in your student days. So, I mean, there's something about your work which has very sculptural quality to it. So can you talk
Absolutely.
about
I think that, I'm going to say something that sounds a little bit sort of a play with semantics, but I think that the sculpture was influenced by something as well. And that, so things come and go. It's this beauty of, who kisses whom first. So it's really, sculpture was influenced by the realities of those existing times. If you look at the kind of the localization of figure and stance. So what one does is that one has love affairs where you take the aura of what it gives you, but then it's not enough just to hold the memory of the kiss. You have to do something with that to make it much more poignant. You have to make it poetic. You have to make it become part of your existence. And so influences in that sense are many. I would say that sculpture, Indian art traditions, I mean, if you can go to Mayan sculpture, you can go to many things, you go Egyptian, So for me, the world is my plethora. I am unabashedly the magpie, because nothing for me is in that sense sacred, to be not appropriated if I see relevance. But what is interesting is that I paint like I cook, or I cook like I paint, maybe. You take whatever you have and you make it the most delectable dish. you make it so that it seduces you, and you don't then remember what all those proportions were finally. So I think that's the best way I can answer you, because my influences are varied. You know, they're too many to even list. But finally, what it does is it flows into my own consciousness to be picked apart, to be deconstructed, and to be reassimilated into what would then constitute as the credibility of my realities, my concerns. So, you know, I look at all the women in the audience. I mean, all of you, the way you sit, you know, you're all sculptural in every posture that you have. The beauty of your colors, the beauty of your... So you have this sort of symbiotic relationship of how something reflects and is immortalized and then comes back through the lived as well.
The works you have done in your formative years are quite agitated and fragmented. But as the time progresses, your works are becoming very quiet, without noise, but very potent, very poignant, very contemplative. I mean, I find a strange kind of transmutation of the painter itself in your paintings.
I'm 56. I'm 56. I'm not 26 anymore. No, I think that's a great observation. What I did was I chose to use a fractured, splintered, kaleidoscopic, in-your-face, very sexual imagery. I mean, I have done hundreds of works, and so what you see here is not even 1/10. And the reason was, it was my attempt to be able to use something like you put somebody in the middle of cold water and pull them out. And that's what happens. And so you're doing it as a strategy, a linguistic strategy that talks about something in its own language. But then, you know, when you want to, I'm sure many of us are parents. I have a 36-year-old son, as you would well know after this lecture. So when you want to make a point with your child, you don't just go on and on and on in the same angry tone. You kind of then modulate it, because that's what's going to penetrate. So that's also what you do with your own ideas. In many ways, I'm saying the same thing thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of times. And that's why perhaps I'm fascinated with things like, you know, Japanese painting or, you know, Zen, where somebody can spend their whole life painting one bamboo, but that bamboo is painted with all the nuances that reflect the changing seasons, the way it's growing and the way it was young, and then when it withers and dies, and how it multiplies. If you look at our own Indian miniature traditions, the varied ones that we have, the beautiful miniatures in your wonderful museum, to an untutored eye, they'd all look, you know, similar, and their eyes would look the same, but in fact they're not. They are nuanced differences, because nothing is ever the same. So I desire to also look at the prevailing spaces of need and necessity. In the 80s, there were certain necessities that required, or as I perceived, required my articulation to be the way it was. I then wanted to take the celebration of, you know, look at all our wonderful young women here. They are emancipated, you know, young people who have inherited this legacy of the strife to bring that freedom and liberty to them. And so their struggles are going to be very different. And what we need to gift to them are the discourses that address those things. You know, we are having situations of atrocities where the unfortunate aspect of rape occurs, as we all know it. And then we have discussions that say, oh, well, you know, she was dressed like this, she had this short skirt. Well, you know, today's woman chooses from wherever she comes from to decide her representation. And if it's going to be a short skirt and a halter neck, or if I like my sari because it covers my very, very fat little stomach, you know, well and good. We choose our representations according to what what our needs are. And there is a trend that moves with time, and our liberties are not as are defined differently. So sometimes politics brings back conservatism, which we are seeing in India today, but we also have spaces of empowered thinking that have taken life choices into different spaces. It's the same with art. You address those issues in accordance with what you see the need of the hour to be. So I feel the need of the art to choose the celebration. I want all of these wonderful women, all of us and our ancestors and our youngsters, to recognize the pride of what makes us stand so erect and so tall, and know that we still have many years in which we still have to guard our liberty. So,
I found your works very evolutionary, but you just now referred, you used a phrase, spaces of needs and necessity. I'm going to ask you a politically incorrect question. How do you look at all women exhibitions? Is it a privilege or a necessity?
An interesting point. I have actually very often steered clear away from all women's exhibitions. It depends on who constitutes the artists. I think it's a double-edged sword. I would like to say that all women hold the genius, all thinking people. For me, men and women are equal in the space of those who desire to have a thinking process that negotiates equality in a truthful manner. Liberty and freedom is everybody's right. So that's not only the feminist thought is not the prerogative only of women. I have many, all my male friends are feminist. Having said that, if I have to curate, and as I do, I can curate a very interesting show of gender-specific art. I think it depends on, I would need to know what exhibition we're talking about. If it's just putting a group of women together and where the standard and the intentions don't hold up, then I have often not been part of them. They're welcome to have it, why not, more power to them, but it doesn't fascinate me intellectually.
I too am going to ask a very politically incorrect.
I invite
there were a group of people who say we are going to organize all men's exhibition. How would you respond to that?
I would have no problem in that at all. I think that, for example, I've seen, I have some wonderful friends, as I said, and I must make one small correction to Mrs. Judge. The Radical Painters and Sculptors Association, they were very dear friends, and it was not really because I couldn't be part of them. I was very much part of them. I was never inclined to be a sort of member, and they were vital and wonderful to the evolution of myself. So it's just a small correction. No, I think that, for example, if five young men, I mean, look at the Bombay Boys. We had, Jitish Kalat and Anand Joshi, more power to them, why not? I mean, sometimes you group together because you're friends, you have other spaces of affiliation, No,
I meant if somebody specifically mentions all men's exhibition.
Why not? Good for you. We can have it as the all-beard group, no problem at all.
No, I would have a problem with that, because I think when we say we are Chandigarhians, we are Punjabis, we are Maharashtrians, we are Indians, like when we specifically put stress on that particular thing, I think we are excluding a whole lot of humanity, from that.
Divanji, nothing will include everything. I think it depends on what the politics and the nature of that is. I mean, if it's going to be something that that holds the dangers, and I don't wish to spell it out too much in political words, but if it holds the dangers of things that are dangerous in their fundamentalism, then I would certainly say that obviously, an intellectual mind is not going to prescribe to that. But if, say, for example, 5 friends who lived in a hostel together, painted together, Well, why not? It's okay, you know. I mean, we create our spaces of history from intimacies as well. And oral histories fascinate me. I think that oral, there needs to be much more of that. And I think that, you know, you could be a cycling group that goes out drawing, and then you want to do a book that is about that. There's some sensibilities that belong within gender, and I'm quite comfortable with that. What we're talking about are much larger issues. Certainly, I agree with you that when it becomes regionalized and, you know, therefore exclusive. For example, I could never really apply. I'm a mongrel. I love my mongrel status. My father was in the Air Force, so domicile, you know, where is domicile for you? And I was living most of my life in Baroda, and so I could never apply either to Karnataka for a grant of even 100 rupees, nor to Gujarat. I don't know where Parsis belong. I mean, maybe Navsari, some Tata Foundation. I don't know. I never could, you know, I couldn't apply for anything. But in some ways, I didn't give a damn. You know, I think that this nomadic space also is quite nice. It keeps you being able to hold your loyalties wider. I don't know a vernacular. I'm very bad with regional languages. I wish I did. I speak abysmal Hindi, but I still speak it, and, you know, my students will laugh a little bit, and then we get to the crux of communication because I can manage. It's okay, you know. I mean, that's the beauty of India. We're like a dice. You roll it and you see what number you come up with, you know.
मोस्टली जो आर्टिस्ट होते हैं जब वो अपने ना कल्मिनेशन पे पहुंचते हैं, बहुत सारा फील्ड में रह के वो फिर चाइल्डिश नेचर में आते हैं. उनकी जो ना होता है ना, जो लास्ट पेंटिंग्स होती है ऑलमोस्ट, तो वो ना उनमें एक चाइल्डिश नेचर दिखता है.
But I wouldn't, I mean, when you look at Souza's work or Hussein's work or Tayyab Mehta's work, I wouldn't attribute that. Maybe I'm unable to answer that. I would say if it's a criticism you have or it's an observation, it must be valid. It's something that you obviously feel. So who would I be to refute that? But in my observation, I don't think so. I think that, I mean, look at somebody like Nandalal, Binod Bihari Mukherjee. He was blind, and, you know, the kind of art he finally did. You know, look at Tayyab Mehta, Akbar Padamsi, you know, any of your great Indian artists, Shergill. I don't see a childishness or a lack of maturity. I look at K.G. Subramaniam. You know, if you think I'm prolific, I look like the waiter in a zoo or something. I mean, he paints hundreds of paintings, and with such intensity, and they're not childish at all. So I may have not understood your question, so I'm sorry, but that's what I would observe.
So I think what he meant was, like, as you mature in life, a lot of things get filtered out, you know. Simplification in the mind.
Well, you know, it's also how you view the world. As I have sort of a decade tendency. I've looked at, and I propagate that. I think 20 to 30, you hold the pinnacle of your kind of argument. 30 to 40, you kind of, you know, open it up and re-examine it. 40 to 50, you elaborate on it. 50 to 60, you celebrate it. You know, so I mean, that's how do you break your life down? All things, living your life is also a journey, and when you're a certain age, you're privy to certain things. You know, I think the sort of experiences of being a mother. If I hadn't been a mother, I wouldn't have been privy to those experiences. And that, how does it indent you, you know? I think that you add onto your life, and when you add, you have to filter as well, because otherwise you'll drown. So I mean, it's the way I buy saris. Everything has to go into my cupboard very neatly. So if I buy 5 saris, I give 5 saris away. That's the philosophy. So, you know, you hold an idea and you hold it for some time, and you bring in another idea, it replaces it. You need to re-examine it. So it's just the way you order your life. I still don't know if I've answered your question, but hopefully.
Thank you. Nonika.
Okay, you spoke of censorship. Can you share any incident or anecdote?
Oh, many. my art was returning from Italy, one of the many things, and it had gone from India and it had gone for an exhibition. In fact, a work similar to this, what I had shown you was on a gold background with the lotus that comes out of the vagina, like an umbilical cord. We have very strange custom laws. We have, actual legal problems, legal things. But the crux of the matter is that we have, let me rephrase this. The problem in India is that all bureaucratic spaces are not standardized. And so what you have is petty power that grows wings and flaps with as much, passion as it can. So it all depends on the interpretation of one single person. I have chosen to not indulge in spaces of bribery and corruption, and that's a choice I make. And so I suppose if my gallery had offered money, maybe, who knows. We were trying to do it without the contact factor. That's another thing I can't stand. I can't stand that, pata hai main kaun hu, kind of like, it's really quite an overused phrase in India. But finally, we had to resort to it, and I'm not going to take the name of the person, but it was a highly placed person who had to then intervene, because what they were going to do was they were going to take all my works and burn them. And not confiscate, just burn them. So yeah, that's the way my country, my nation that I love and hold with great respect, can often be whimsical in their interpretation. Our legal systems are very problematic in terms of how laws for women and how you safeguard things. Censorship issues have not been tabulated well. The copyright issues are absolutely ambiguous. And so the forcefulness with which one has to, insist on things is often problematic. And I will say that I'm often not very happy with spaces of governmental cultural bodies at the center that have not played their role as best they can. And therefore I must say with great delight how pleased I am. I have just really made Divanji's acquaintance and look forward to knowing him well as a colleague. But I must say, without any partisan bias at all, with what respect I have for the professionalism with which you're conducting how a Lalit Kala should function. And I think the other Lalit Kalas really take a leaf out of your book. So I think we'll meet. Absolutely.
I'm so humbled. I give the credit to our team, people who are with the Lalit Kala Academy at the moment, and also part of the, credit goes to the Chandigarh, being a very special union territory. Some of the politicians not being the Babus. Babus have been sensible, and sensible Babus have been posted here in the last few years. So probably that is also one of the reasons. We have full freedom. That's why, maybe. Thank you. Thank you very much, really.
I want to put a question that is, what are role of feelings in any artwork?
Feeling.
Like.
Yeah. Okay, well, the space of sentiment is always something that will nurture. But I would, rather than say feeling, I would say one's empathy. I think you find your connection through empathy. I'm not somebody who's, I may be sentimental for other things, but as a thinking person, I keep sentiment very, very much at a distance. I think it's a bit of a cancer. Or sentimentality, I should say, not sentiment, sentimentality. But so we often, mistake that. We would kind of, we are also a chalta hai a nation, no? ये मेरा बेटी जैसा है तो चलो उसको भी ऐसा करो, and वो मेरा बेटा जैसा है तो उसको भी करो. So a lot of sentiment in that space. But in the space of art, I think that all things are unnegotiable. if you can find the way to balance something. So that, I think, comes from years of training. Let's take music, or let's take cinema, because we're much more fluent in or comfortable in those areas. We feel less intimidated. You take a Kurosawa film, or you take a film that will deal with love and tenderness. You can deal with it beautifully without it being explicit. I remember there is the film Bombay, where the opening shot is Manisha Koirala's eyes that just flood the screen. So even a popular film can do something. You decide where you put that heart pull. Where do you put that thing that pulls the heart? And then you don't pull it too much, so that it's remembered. It's like putting perfume. Now you don't drown yourself in perfume. You don't put perfume enough so that you'll smell it yourself. That's the worst thing to do. It's for others to smell, not for you. So you waft by, and it's caught, and it's held in this wonder. And that's what maybe the best metaphor in this instance would be, that how do you place something that catches the sensibility of somebody, holds them, rivets them, and doesn't let them go? But it's just that little bit. It's that little something.
Thank you. Actually, since she's appreciated me so much, I must actually take this opportunity, or use this opportunity as a kind of a thanks to my people who have actually helped me grow in this manner, like people like Professor Oberoi from Punjab University, Kumar Vikal, Satyapal Gautam, Kamal Tiwari, Professor Barad is sitting in here, and my teachers, which are Mohan Chopra, Viren Tanwa, and Avtarji Dhanjal, who first invited me to UK for a residency, and many others. So it is all a kind of an accumulation of being in the company of those who really were concerned about India, about this society, about the freedom, about the liberty to say what people wanted to say. All this has become a part of me because of all these people whose company I have been. And then now, when you do something, if you're doing it from your heart and with honesty and integrity, then people get together. They want to be associated with you. In fact, they have fresh ideas. And now, look at this audience. These people have actually really genuinely contributed to the group of people who really regularly come and participate in these intellectual discourses, and the visual vocabulary which is being created all over the country being projected to them, and they also respond back. So we are now a good homogeneous group of people who like to differ, but also like to think together. And you have come as it's not passing on the compliment back. You have come as a whiff of fresh air in this gathering, because with such eloquence, with such kind of a clarity of mind and thought, of vision, how you are negotiate difficult paths and ways, not in your personal life, in your artistic life, but also with total honesty, the way you're answering those questions, and you don't think that there is anything left unanswered, That is the beauty. Thank you so much. Anybody else? Professor Brad?
I don't know how you're going to take this. It might sound very silly, as a matter of fact, but one thing that struck me was striking similarity of style in your case and in the case of someone who had, I think, a very strikingly dissimilar sensibility, Manjeet Bawa, right? At least a part of your work would remind one of Manjeet Bawa's work, plain backgrounds, basic colors, even the figuration in some ways, putting a human. Yeah, maybe Arpana as well. But I say Manjeet Bawa because Manjeet Bawa wasn't political in that sense, Sufi, mystical, folklorish, and so on and so forth. Whereas you are very political, explicitly so. And yet two artists with such striking, contrasting sensibilities choose to work in a style that sounds so similar, that looks so similar. Is this incidental, or you think there is something to it?
We share a lover. and that lover is miniatures. Both of us. I think we come from a tradition of loving miniatures.
Proud in the city to have one of the doyens who has brought miniatures to the center stage, Professor B.N. Goswami.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the city can be proud of it.
Absolutely, yes.
Ma'am, I wanted to ask you a question. You said that you studied in Royal Academy of Arts, London. Royal College of Art.
Yes.
And then you said that you were offered many job opportunities. But still during that time when your work was censored here and still you came here in India and worked here. Well, most of the younger generation, today also, we all want to go out and work there because we think that art is not, being appreciated here. But still during that time, you came here and still you worked here and you've been here since past so many years. What made you come here? What were the thoughts that you harbored in your young mind during that time?
I'll make a small correction. I think that in fact, many young people today don't have a need to go abroad. And in fact, I've been instrumental in sort of, because I work honorary for the Inlaks Committee as well, change some of the situations where we are providing more opportunities of residencies rather than just having this old idea of somebody going to study abroad. But to answer your question more specifically, my territory of belonging is India, is Asia. There was never any conflict. I think also one of the things that freed me very early on is I was not frightened of economic struggle. And I was sharing with Parul, who we had a wonderful conversation this afternoon, that perhaps, my arrogance comes into play where, I'm not going to starve. I don't need to marry somebody to get my money. I don't need to be somebody's daughter, lovely as it was to be. Because I am smart enough to earn. I can do a tiffin service. I can get a group of people together, and I can go and get houses cleaned professionally. I mean, you name it. I can babysit. I can do anything. I can do shop windows. So I can write. I mean, I can design cards and sell them a little bit for more than ₹1 a card. So at the end of the day, when you take away the fear of your economic concerns, and when you place your own self-dignity as very important, and you then ask yourself what that would mean. For me, belonging where my voice holds meaning. My voice holds meaning in my country, no? I can turn around and say, "Kya kar rahe? Thup kyun maar rahe? Haan? Kya kar rahe?" I can do that because it's my damn country, no? What am I going to go and tell some Belgian man why he's throwing something somewhere or why he's harassing? I would do it. I still do it. And poke my very long Parsi nose into everybody else's business. But this is my country. And all the things that I desire to examine, I can examine with, because I know it. I know all the intricacies of systems that anger me. My outrage and my pride are contained in this land. So I am a daughter of India.
I would like you to share it with the audience, your experience of that Neeli massacre, and then before I come to her.
Sure, absolutely. Oh, well, no, I thought I did mention it. Maybe I'm repeating myself. No, I think that, there are times when you need to be reminded about something that you may have taken for granted. And I was studying in '83, so I just finished a year at the RCA, and there was this horrible situation in India of the massacre of the children in Assam, the Neeli massacre, and I was, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't believe I was there on this very well-funded scholarship, and in studying in this very privileged situation. And so I went to my tutor, Peter de Francia, and I thought, because he was Marxist and thinking, that he would actually acknowledge and be appreciative of this decision that I was making. I wanted to come back to India immediately. I wanted to go and work in a village. I wanted to teach kids. And he mocked me. He said, come, I'll help you pack your bags. He said, the problem with you is that you haven't really understood your role in why you have chosen to be an artist. And that, what does art mean for you? Because if you haven't understood the power that art has within a social space, and what you want for yourself is a feel-good factor. You want to be able to teach the little kids and see that they brush their teeth, and count the number of kids that get educated. It's not that that is not a worthy thing, but that to believe that art does not hold the potential of having something of significance, then he said, pack your bags. And it was sort of shocking for me to recognize and realize that, in fact, which society can be absent of great art? And I'm talking about art of a standard. I'm not coy about the fact. I'm not going to say that all things that you just spit on the ground and that's some great manifestation of an art, a conceptual idea. So, great literature, great cinema, great design, great jewelry design, great furniture design, great architecture, everything. It is what makes a society hold its pulse. And when a society is bereft of that, when a society, for whatever its unfortunate circumstances or tragic occurrences, where it is obliterated, where it is oppressed, it is put down, and you're told, you can't watch this, you can't see that, you can't sing, you can't dance, it kills a society. And so art has such a power. For me, that's what my elixir is. I believe in it. I firmly, I cannot imagine my country, my India, without its amazing heritage. And to believe that somewhere, maybe, perhaps, I may be one tiny little, thread in the larger tapestry that, if placed there, will hold significance.
Hello, ma'am. Like you have told that many things happened in your life, like some soul-shattering things happened in your life at like very small age. So I just want to ask that, does they affected your work, or do they still affect your work?
No, nothing soul-shattering. Let me be very clear about this. I went through a breakup of a marriage in a way that was difficult, but I think that I don't view life as through the prism of being a victim. I believe that, again, I'm privileged in my education to be able to recognize that it takes two hands to clap, and so perhaps my choice in doing something was incorrect. Having said that, what I believe is that whatever you encounter, and there have been things of pain, of bewilderment, of things that you don't necessarily believe would be the choice you would have made or you would want. But then I have a way of dealing with that. First of all, I'd have to say that I'm not religious, I'm atheist. And so when you don't have, by choice, if you don't have religion, you find other spaces of faith. Faith is something you need. And so I think of human survival as being the greatest space of faith. And I have a visual that always brings me to my senses when I feel a bit sorry for myself, which we all do from time to time. And that is a photograph of landmine survivors, little children, their bodies completely blown off from, so they're stumped. And they're playing soccer, they're playing football, and they're having the time of their lives. I have nothing else to say. So, you know, you need to contextualize and you need to get a perspective on things. And if things don't, if things are difficult for one, one has to look at the bigger picture and find one's privilege. I think that it's a lovely thing, a completely non-religious, non-spiritual, none of these adjectives. Just ask yourself in a day to be grateful for 5 things. It turns your life around, you know. So then you have nothing to feel sorry about. No?
Thank you, Rekha ji.
Is there any particular work which is your favorite and why?
You know, I'm a strange person. I have many children. I adopt many children. So I'm going to use that as the metaphor. It's impossible for a mother or for you know, a nurturer to have a favorite. You sort of desire that all things have something of value in them. So I think I look at my art that way.
Thank you. Thank you. In fact, there is so much to see and so much to observe in work. In fact, if we have a session, we say, okay, we'll show one work and we keep discussing about that one work one evening. I think all the evenings can be filled with that. You know, it can trigger that kind of a debate, you know, which is necessary in our society, especially because Chandigarh lacks those kind of addas where intellectuals meet, which used to be the case earlier in the coffee house when some people used to meet, some journalists, some writers, poets, theatre persons and musicians, but I don't see it happening anymore. And neither in the university, the student center used to be one of the addas. And now I think we need some kind of an adda. If the museum creates some kind of a shop and a small restaurant where we can all come and in impromptu meetings and discussions. And these works, I think they can probably trigger a poet to write 1,000 poems, or a playwright can write a number of plays. And I'm sure, and many of the, in fact, discussions must have taken place around your work, which I would love to see if they have been recorded. If not, by now, I think I should take the initiative. We should do that, which I think I've become a bit of an expert on. But thank you so much. This is a wonderful evening, which she said she's privileged. I think we are privileged. Thank you so much once again. Thank you all. And I thank her for giving us the copyrights for a few of our works to be produced on the memorabilia. And they are available in a very, very limited edition. They might not be repeated again. So if you wish to pick them up, you are very welcome.